It's the Inspired by JoAnn show.
Meet your host, certified confidence coach JoAnn Dean, inspiring women on the rise. Welcome to another Faith Chat.
Well, hello, Faith Walkers. Welcome. I am JoAnn, and this is the Inspired by JoAnn show, where faith is our fuel. Today's Faith Walker is Master Grief Coach, author, and educator, Miami Knight. Miami experienced 3 major life-changing losses within her family structure in 8 years. She lost her father and sister of complicated natural causes, and her beloved son Tyke, who was shot in an incident which also claimed the life of his friend. Though Tyke survived, he lived with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and survivor's remorse. 5 years after his attempted murder, Tyke died by gun suicide. Miami's specialty is bereavement recovery. Miami is the founder of Miami Knight LLC, a grief education and training company. She authored The Key Process, a grief guide to mastering spiritual healing. She's a shamanic energy practitioner and the host of Grief Talk on It's the Miami Knight Show. She also serves on the National Council for Behavioral Health as a mental health first aider. Miami is a voice for Everytown Survivor Network, a part of both Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety, sharing her story with an array of audiences. Let's welcome Miami Knight.
Well, hello there. And today we are excited because we have a very special guest, actually the first guest to the Inspired by JoAnn show, none other than Master Grief Coach and Educator herself, Miami Knight.
Hi, JoAnn. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on to your podcast. I'm so excited for your journey with this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We are delighted to have you. So we thought it was so fitting to have you because today our topic is expected versus unexpected loss. Miami, because of the season we're in, I thought it would be beneficial to have this conversation, especially since we've had so many meaningful conversations offline.
Yes.
I wanted to give people a sneak peek into your genius. I've had the experience of walking with you and being a part of your genius for years. And most recently, I've watched you take a traumatic loss and use it as a vehicle to serve others. And so I want us to just dive right in. Okay. And I want to start with the question, or should I say the statement, grief is overwhelming, but
you can choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you decide to accept it as well.
Tell us a little bit about how you became a grief coach.
Well, along my journey after losing my father, my sister, and then my son, and they were all traumatic deaths. And I just needed something that was larger than I was at the time in my mindset. I was like, I'm searching for something that is outside of me, that I wasn't there yet, but I needed some tools in order to be able to do that. And so along the journey, which was maybe like the fifth or fourth thing that I had done, was researching and looking for what could support me. And while I was doing that, I came across this trainer that was providing online services of how to become a coach, but not only a coach, a grief coach, which was something that I definitely needed to help me through the process. And prior to, I had did a lot of other work prior to that, which was first deciding, and that's my journey with you helping me understanding my worth and what all I needed to become whole, even prior to me even knowing that I'm having these feelings that I wasn't, because of the loss of my son tragically, just 2 days after you and I was having one of JoAnn's amazing sessions on, and she was my life coach at the time, and inspire me of what to do to start my own business. And 2 days later, I had received this phone call that Taiki had been missing. And of course, just being afraid of not knowing how to move through that life that didn't know existed. Um, Grief coaching kind of supported me into moving through that process and helping me define my purpose of what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I have been seeing you. I have been seeing your podcast, and they all have been amazing. And just listening to the stories and the journeys of other people that have just come alongside you, I am just a proud friend.
Oh,
I'm
thank you
a
so
proud
much.
friend as I watch you transform and use the gifts that are within you to serve others. Talk a little bit more. I know that you published a book. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about your book and what purpose you wanted to serve.
Well, the key process, because I named it after my son, his name was Taiki. The key process, it's a grief guide to mastering spiritual healing. And I, within my process of learning this road that was, like I said, untraveled, I really wanted people to know my side of my journey and what that looked like for me. And it wasn't, first of all, grief is very individualized to everyone. And so my journey may not look like yours. Yours definitely, of course, didn't look like mine. And I just wanted my side of the story so people could understand my truth, because not outside of losing my son and my father and my sister, there was still some other background stuff that people just didn't know about me, work, other children, other relationships that I had. And I just wanted to make sure that people knew all of that and what kind of got me through that process. And I developed these seven, I call them the 7 key grief guide of the things that kind of, supported me in that. And I just wanted people to understand what that looked like for me. And it was actually me finding meditation first. That was the first step, meditation, and being prayerfully mindful and what that looked like. And the rest of the keys, of course, that are inside the book. But I developed that just because I wanted a resource for people to be able to go to learn all the things and the steps that helped me along my journey.
So where can we find the book?
Okay, well, you can go to my website, which is www.miami, Miami, night, KNIGHT, LLC.com. And it's also on Amazon. If you just type Miami Night into the search bar, it'll come up.
I remember you talking a little bit about traumatic death and traumatic loss. What would you like the listeners to know about the experience of a traumatic death?
Well, first of all, it's the disbelief of and the shock behind this life-altering event that has occurred. Um, we never seem to think that any type of traumatic event should happen to us. So that's the first time acknowledging that that's a part of the process that you'll definitely, go through. And the other part is you don't get to say goodbye. That's a um, that's an issue because with losing something, not only if it was a death or if you lost your job or if you lost your pet, not being able to do those things, which is, excuse me, I'm saying all this to say, not being able to say goodbye or knowing that you had an opportunity, that was your last opportunity, basically, to be able to not to say something or love on that person or your loved one or a friend or whoever it is. Just not being able to say goodbye just leaves so much guilt of some of the things that you could have, would have, should have said had you known.
Mm-hmm.
um, you have these feelings of unfairness, that why did this happen to me like this? Why did I have to, incur this experience? Um, but the bigger thing is needing to know why, and you don't get answers right away.
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially during a time where your faith is so wavered, that why kind of hangs around like a dark cloud for a very long time. And you become vulnerable to things that you probably shouldn't be. You become anxious. So there's all these feelings of emotions that one may have, and they're common emotions that that we may have, but they can kind of spiral out. Um, and that traumatic loss for the family is very difficult, because that now that unit has been separated, and um, it doesn't look the same anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the family unit as a whole kind of goes through this whole um, way of living that you've never imagining somebody no longer in your life that for all you've known had been there, and to see that what that looks like without notice or preparation is very difficult. And it's just having you just don't fully understand the toll that it's going to take on you until you actually experience it.
Oh, wow, you touched on so many great things. And so for the first thing I would ask you is, how did you find a way to say goodbye?
I did. For me, because my son lived in Florida, and it took a couple of days still by the time I got there, and us making arrangements. And because how the way that Taiki died, it was such last minute. He was also an adult, so there was like we didn't have insurance, so we was unprepared for the actually trying to make funeral arrangements and what that looked like for his father and I to be able to come up with that. So when we met with the funeral home, and all of the aspects of what it takes for them to even receive the body and all this kind of stuff, it just, I didn't care what the cost. I didn't care what I needed to do. I just needed to see my child, because he was in transition from the hospital to the morgue to the, so it was just so many things that was stopping me, was holding me up from being able to physically see him. So for me, seeing him that first time, I was able to say hello, because I had not seen him in a while, because he was an adult. He lived in Florida. And physically seeing him, I mean, I just needed to see him no matter what state it was. I just needed to put my eyes on him. And when I first did that, which was at the wake, of course, I had so much relief that I just saw him. I was able to do both at the same time. I was, because I just needed physically to see him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I was able to, because it was in front of my face. There was nothing else that I could do at this point. Life is no longer as it was going to, exist the same. And um, that was the first time that I was able to do it, of course, and at the funeral, but and to the graveside, and really let go. So it took 3 chances for me to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the guilt.
Uh yeah, that's also a part of the bargaining aspect of, and also it could be all of the emotions when you're dealing with the grieving process and the stages. But the guilt, of course, because my son was raised by his father, and him being raised by his father, at the age of 2 years old, his father had made a decision that that would be the best thing for our son, because I was moving to Georgia. And I've really thought at the time that that was the best thing that I could have done, because my son's father had just had lost himself when Taiki was 2 months old. His grandmother died from lupus, and so his father had lost his mother, and there was no way that I could just take him away from him, knowing that he had just had this loss. Still, he was dealing with almost losing his father at the same time, because his parents was up in age, um, and I just could not do that. So having my son being raised by his father, and of course we did the occasional birthdays, holidays, summer times, and he had all the breaks, or I would go there, he would come here. It still just never was enough after his passing for me to feel like I was a good mom, because I wasn't there every day. So there was all of this guilt surrounding that. There was guilt surrounding the fact that um, he kept saying he was coming, and I kept saying, Tyke, you're not coming. And, oh, I'm coming, Mom. I'm coming up there this month. And then one month that he was coming, I ended up going to California to see my oldest daughter because she was sick, and I missed out on the weekend that he was to. The guilt just, tore me up from time not being spent. But I had a reminder too, in the guilt that I did have an opportunity to spend a lot of time with my son, because originally in 2011 he was shot, and I was his caretaker at that time. So I was able to rebuild that relationship, not being there when he was younger, but being there as an adult when he was basically back in a child state from having a traumatic brain injury from the shooting. And I did have that opportunity, so I was able to weigh the guilt and the being okay with that. I was able to kind of heal that, because things come into your remembrance of, even though you may have these intrusive thoughts and these disbeliefs of how horrible we that mind chatter that's in our head may make us feel, there's still some way that we can counter offset that too, though.
I'm glad that those things came back to your remembrance, because I know what type of mom you are. And so I'm glad that you were able to work through that. So what would you say to another mother who is grieving right now?
I would just say, take your time in this process. Like I've said earlier, that this is an experience that you've never had. So time is definitely of the essence during this period. Getting to know who you are is going to be very, very important, because you didn't know a life outside of your child. Or any loss that you've had. So give yourself enough time to work through the process and what best works for you. There's no, timeline, and because grief is nonlinear. So, and it doesn't happen in these waves. I know that there's the stages that are out there, but it doesn't happen like that for everyone. So just take your time in figuring out what emotions that you're having. Speak to that emotion, feel the emotion. Don't, not grieve. Don't be not sad. You should be sad if you've lost someone, so that's normal. And whatever feeling, just take a mental note and journal a lot, which is good. That kind of helped me with the process of writing the key process. But do those things that are going to be best for you at this time, and definitely self-care.
Such great information to support those that are going through loss, especially, in this time where we're all sheltered in. And it feels like we're dealing with this invisible thing that's taking so many lives. In Miami, is it not only taking lives, but people are in isolation. What would you say to that person that's feeling isolated right now? Kind of how to work their way through where they are right now, feeling alone.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Social isolation is definitely something that it takes some time getting used to. We didn't even realize that this was going to be a time that we're in, and not discover that being or having this cabin fever, as they call it, would be an issue for us, and that it would bring up some things that we didn't realize about ourselves that we needed to work on. But whatever comes up for you, if it's anger, if it's the awareness of, I haven't been with myself for some time, so let me get to re-engage with her and get to know who she is again. So do those things. One thing that I really wanted to talk about, which is love and belonging, and that's on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as just being an individual. That portion of it being number 3, because of course first is self-actualization and then esteem, but that third piece of it is love and belonging. And when we don't feel that we have that, and the thing that we could have loved, not necessarily that you don't have love in your household, but you loved going to work, you loved, if you were an event planner, for instance, you loved planning events, you loved driving into work, some people could have, you loved your coworkers, or you loved your clients, and not being able to do those things right now can be very, very difficult because we're just in a shift now. And as JoAnn and I spoke earlier, it's really a time to kind of get into who you really are again, and figure what that looks out like for you. um, as we know it, we may go back, and of course at some point in time we will be able to get back out and do the things that we used to do, but at the same time this is kind of learning and are teaching us and guiding us into the world will look different for us now. So to accept that, which is a grieving process, this whole social isolation, being home, not knowing if your loved ones are okay, not being able to even visit your loved one in the hospital right now, that has to be devastating for families, I know. But it's a grieving process even for us, which it's first all this denial, and then of course we've been angry because we don't have answers or there's not tests available. And then there's going to be this bargaining. Oh, I should have saw my grandmother 2 weeks ago before she got sick, or I should have saw my or talked to my best friend more. When really, to be honest with you, they're even taking their cell phones away when they're in the hospital. So they're really not having any type of engagement. The patients aren't right now, especially if they're in ICU. So can you imagine what that looks like for the individual that's actually going through, that's having the sickness or the illness, with dealing with coronavirus right now? But at some point, after the depression weighs away, because we will be in that period too, and a lot of us is experiencing that, which is normal, being this way now, acceptance will come. It will come, and it doesn't all happen in that order, but all of those stages will happen, but we have to be open to it.
Wow, looking at how you've dealt with unexpected loss and all the tools you've acquired, and just being able to share that with other people, I kind of want to shift a little bit. And so my experience was a little different in the sense that my grandmother was almost 90 years old. And I always say one of the things that she gave me was the gift of instructions,
Yes.
that she prepared me for her end. And as difficult as it was to have those conversations, I'm glad she was a woman of wisdom and saw fit to weave those moments in every time we talk. And so I remember going home, a friend of mine was having a birthday, and she wanted to attend the Essence Fest. And as I visited my grandmother to say our goodbyes, like we typically do, she said, come on. You know, she always got to give me something to take with me. She said, I want to show you something. So I'm going in the other room to see what new outfit she bought, what new hat, because that was one of the things we shared. We both like fashion. I got it from her. And she would always joke and say, girl, look, when I go, you better have me together or else, you know? So we go in the room, and she pulls this item off the rack, and it's in a plastic bag, and she opens it, Miami, and she said, this is the outfit. And I was like, oh my God, it's beautiful. And then it hit me. This is the outfit.
Mm.
And I fought back the tears in that moment. And so she softened the blow with shifting to another rack of clothes. She loved clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Shifting to another rack of clothes. And she said, you know, pick one. I can't fit this stuff anymore. Pick one. So I remember picking this black and white maxi dress that I took with me. And the next time I visited her, of course, I had it altered because she was taller than me. And I wore it, and she was like, oh my God, like she didn't even remember that was the item. But in that moment, I remember riding back to Atlanta with my friends in reflective mode. And I was thinking, I said, wow, I wonder what she's thinking. I'm wondering what she's feeling.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you know, does she have any regrets? Is there something she still wants to do? I was wondering what that process felt like for her.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, I was thinking, well, how many more conversations will I get to have with her? How many more times will I get to visit her? But I was really grateful that every time thereafter, when I spoke with her, she gave me a little bit more instructions. And so I remember when she called and we chatted, and then I said, okay, I'm going to make a trip home. When I got home, she handed me this envelope, and there were all these pieces of papers with her. And she said, now, I may have repeated myself, but you'll figure it out. And so she had literally written everybody she wanted to speak.
Yeah.
Everything I needed to know about. She said, I know you're going to put it together. And so I was able to put together her program, put together her obituary based on the information that she gave me.
Yeah.
And while it was really challenging to do that, it gave us time together, Miami.
Mm-hmm.
It gave us that time together. And I got to feel her and know her through those little notes that she wrote. And I think was intentional on her part, because there was some words that she had never spoken, but I got a glimpse of more depth as to who she was. Like in that moment, I saw her not just as my grandmother, but I saw her as this woman.
Right.
And that was amazing. And so I say all that to say, and I know, I'm parking here a little while, but I say that to say the best thing you can do for your loved ones is leave them with clear instruction, because it gives them a vision of what you want your end to look like. It gives direction. It helps focus. It helps to keep the main thing. So when your loved one transitions, you're in a totally different place emotionally. But if you have written instructions,
right,
you can follow the instructions and you can find peace in knowing that these are the decisions I'm making around what they've asked me. And I get to honor them by fulfilling the instructions that they've given me. And you walk away with this personal sense of satisfaction, knowing that you help keep the peace and the purpose of their life, even as they transitioned.
Right. And I think what's also important too there, it takes down the going back and forth with family members, because you're honoring, like you said, you're honoring her wishes, because you know how family can be during those difficult times. And without the instruction, then everybody has their own input or output of what it should look like, when actually half of the time that's not even what the deceased wanted. But then there's all this stress built around it with the family. So kudos to grandma. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In my book, I wrote about some of the challenges, I faced.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that I could say, when everybody was putting in their 2 cents, I said, this is what she wanted.
Absolutely.
I'm honoring what she wanted. And
Yeah.
you're right, it definitely keeps down the confusion, but there was so much clarity in that moment for me with the planning, because I got to see things totally different.
Yeah.
Even as it related to the role that each one of her children played. Like my grandmother had 6 children, they're all living, but she chose me to carry out her last wishes.
But she's always put you in that position kind of, anyway, you've always been a planner. You know what I'm saying? Just you've always been a coach, you've always been a planner, but that just really came from her spirit anyway. That was, implemented into you over the years. So I mean, it was a perfect fit. She knew what she wanted, and she knew what she was doing.
And that's the other thing, Miami. My grandmother, I was her 7th child. I always say I was her 7th child, even though she didn't give birth to me. But I mean, she raised me from, the day I left the hospital. Really, it really helped me to see how she saw me throughout my life.
Yeah.
I always felt like, oh my God, you got me doing all this stuff, but it was important for her to lay this foundation. I remember as a teenager, I was 13 and I used to sing in the choir. And she was big on keeping first things first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a friend of mine who lived down the street, she was having a party. And I wanted to attend the party, but singing in the choir,
Uh-oh.
we were visiting another church and they had an
Uh-huh.
event. If you were
Yeah, I
ready,
know.
you know. So she had my uncle to give me a ride to the church, and she was gonna meet at the other church. And as we're riding there, I'm telling my uncle, I said, I don't want to go. And he was like, well, what's wrong with you today? And I said,
Uh-oh.
I don't want to go. And I said, let me out. And he was like, oh, you're trying to be grown today. And I said, no, I don't want to go. And so he said, I'm not letting you out. What I'll do is I'll bring you back home.
Mm-hmm.
So he brought me back home and we had a swing on the porch. So me with my smart self, I didn't go in the house because I already knew what the story was going to be, right? I sat behind the swing on the porch and I watched them look for me.
Oh, Lord. JoAnn.
So eventually I came out, right? And so my
Uh-huh.
grandmother said, okay, this is how this is going to work. You had a ride. Apparently you didn't want the ride,
Uh-oh.
but we will keep first things first. And so she drove and I walked alongside her back to the church.
Oh my gosh.
Miami, I share that story because we often revisited that and
Uh-huh.
laughed about it. But once again, that was her teaching me
Mm-hmm.
to keep first things first. And I did get to go to the party after.
Okay.
I went and did what I committed. I had committed to being a part of the choir. I committed
Wow.
to showing up. And so she said, you have to keep first things first.
Wow. I love that. And that's a great, great story. And it has so many visuals in it. So I definitely love it. Wow.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was concerned about as I watched her journey to the end was my grandmother represented home for me.
Mm-hmm.
And once she was gone, my concern was who was going to hold that space, because her home was the hub. It was where all the celebrations took place. It was where all the memories were created. And she loved planning and she loved celebrating and she loved having family around her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad to say that nobody is holding that space now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why, I love following you is that having conversations with you is that, you always give me some nugget to help me move along in that process. And so, just finding a way to adjust to the new normal, to not having her to hold that space. Anything that's coming up for you right now as it relates to when the matriarch is no longer there, and to become self-aware or to how to move beyond that space?
What comes up for me is the meditation, um, because that's really what started me to focus and to be able to self um, actualize my emotions and feelings and being able to just sit still and know, as the word says. So for me, meditation was a big part of my journey because I needed to sit with myself to acknowledge all of the things that I didn't know that I didn't like about myself, um, to want to create change in the things that I wanted to change. How could I be a better mom, since I was feeling guilty about being a mom? How can I be a better wife? Because guilt and grief, it's very challenging. It makes you think all of these things that are not true, but just because you're doing a lot of self-loathing and then you have these interactive thoughts about yourself, you're creating, the mind is just, like they say, the mind is the devil's playground. That's really true, when you're dealing with grief. But the meditation for me was a source. It was a source that I could feel connected with something that was even higher and bigger than I was. And since I didn't know what my life was going to look like without my son anymore, I needed to connect again with my higher self, become more aware of being able to hear from spirit and what I needed. What did my soul desire every day is one of the questions that I often ask while I'm channeling or journeying. Um, I do that because I need to hear and know sometimes because I just don't know. Um, you know, grief is traumatizing. And therefore, since it's traumatizing, it can hit you at any point. I could be traumatizing, but just by, I could, be triggered, excuse me, just by having this conversation with you if I was not full of knowing who I am now in this space that I'm in now. I've come a long way from, um, having the not having the opportunity to visit the things that hurt. That's the one thing we must do. You got to sit with those feelings and those emotions that are kind of scary to deal with. So meditation for me was the biggest thing.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Listen to us, guys. Be still, sit still. It may be a challenge, but just find a place in your house, where you can carve out some space. And you know what? Even if it's a chair, even if it's a corner, even
Mhm.
if it's on your porch, when you go to this space, I'm going to this space because, I want to spend some time being quiet. I want to spend some time listening to
Yeah.
what comes up for me
Yeah.
and to get some direction about what I need to focus on.
Yeah, because
Um,
a lot of times people they say, "Well, I pray," but that's different than meditating on God's word, which He wants us to do both. Yes, He wants us to humble ourselves and pray. Of course, He does, but He also wants us to sit still and know. Because if you're constantly asking and talking to Him, how are you going to be receiving what He's saying? So that's where the meditation comes in for us to sit and know, because you'll be able to hear from spirit. You don't even have to be in actual prayer mode to be able to hear from God, because we all hear that have that inner voice that we hear sometimes, and a lot of time that could be our gut feeling, of us telling us not to do something, to do something. We all have that ability to be able to access that, that channel with our higher self. But it's a matter of, just like everything else, being conditioned to be able to do, which is sitting down. And like right now, we're in a time that we're being forced to do that. And so I would take, if anyone that's out there that's just dealing with everything, well, it's to be honest with you, it's all of us. We're all dealing with something at this point. So I would just, my recommendation and the tool for you to use is, like JoAnn said, carve out some space, or wherever it is. JoAnn has an amazing throne room. I have my prayer room. It just depends on what you want that to look like. Create that space for yourself, sit still, and be okay with whatever comes up, and adjust yourself when they come up. If you feel like you can't handle that, just take some time with it and sit with it and be like, okay, I'm angry about something. And if I am angry about it, let me just work through the anger by acknowledging it first. That's the first thing you could do. Acknowledge that you're angry about it. Now, what is the affirmation that I can say that's the opposite of me being angry? And see yourself being happy. I don't have to be angry. That's a choice that you're making. Do the opposite. I can smile. I can smile because I'm still here. So those are some of the things that I do. Is something that we haven't done in a while, but people really do appreciate it. Writing a letter. Sometimes people just like that sense of, the old way of things, and being able to physically have that. Because I do truly treasure every letter that I have from Taiki. I read them from time to time, and he was just an amazing lyricist anyway. But so, and that was one of the things, my takeaway from um, after burying after burying him, some of the things that his father left for me to take was all of his music and all of his, journals, and being able to now go back and look over and read those things. My son was just really a genius. His mind was just out of this world. And so those are some things that people really appreciate too, is letter. I just wanted to make sure we did touch on that. Um, but some of the right words to say, of course, is you may not have the right words to say, and it's okay for you to say that. Say that I don't have the words to say, but I just want you to know that I care. That's totally fine with you being able to do that, and because you don't know how a person actually feels in their situation, and we could have had the same type of loss, but nobody really understands how I feel. I'm a different person than you are. But if I can help, let me know. That's a good thing to ask, because a lot of times I know in death, I don't care if it's expected or unexpected, you don't know what you need at that point. You don't, I mean, everybody's always asking, do you need anything? You need something? I
Mhm.
was so grateful, don't get me wrong, but it was like, oh, I don't know what I need. I didn't even want to eat. So, with everybody bringing food, and thank you so much because that fed my family. Thank you so much. I didn't know what I needed. So, and also, of course, like you said, your thoughts and prayers are definitely something that you can always express to them. And definitely my favorite is um, to kind of break up where that person is, and to allow them to talk about memory of them,
Mhm. Mhm.
because um, that gets a person totally in a different headspace.
Mhm.
It takes them out of that zone of, oh, this has happened to me, but being able to remember who that person was is just will shift the dynamic of the conversation and make it a lot lighter, and makes the griever feel supported, because they can find out of all of that, they're able to find a good thing, definitely,
Yes.
about their loved
Yes.
one. So that's very important. And asking them, um, for me, it was, I wish people had asked me exactly, even though they did, don't get me wrong, I'm sorry, excuse me. People did ask me what I needed, but allowing me to just say, this is what I need, because I was feeling overwhelmed with all the access. So allow sometime the people to just let you know what they would like for you to do for them. It's not always that it's something that we have to do. Like you said earlier, just be present. And I may not know what I need at this time, but allow me to share and tell you how I'm feeling today. Because a lot of times you may ask a person, oh, say, hey, how are you doing? And then you go on with the conversation, and you never pause to see or to listen to what my response would be,
Mhm.
because you're just so used to, oh, hey, how you doing? You doing all right? And I haven't said a word. I'm just listening. So it's good to listen to the response of a griever.
And so, as we close, I want to talk about just a few tips for moving forward.
Get to know why you are here. We're all here for a reason, and spending some time with yourself and getting to know all these things about you really will reveal and define your purpose of why you're here. My road of my journey didn't quite look like the normal or typical journey of someone's grieving, because um, there was so much inner spiritual work that I had to do. That's why my book is called A Grief Guide to Mastering the Spiritual Healing Process, which is so important when grieving, to just really sit and meditate and learn and be mindful and discover those parts of you that you didn't even know exist, and then they will turn into this beautiful thing. So um, that's all I have to share. But
No, that's amazing, Miami. That's definitely amazing. And I really appreciate you being here, and thank you for sharing that. Because I know for me, it's been 10 years since my sister transitioned. It's been a little over 2 years since my grandmother transitioned. And I find peace in knowing that they are still with me, that they are my angels, and that they're okay. And that, you know what? And they want me to be okay.
yeah,
They wouldn't want me to sit around,
right.
and be moping. They would want me to live life, and me living life honors them.
Yes.
One last thing I want to ask you is, so what is your favorite scripture or quote?
It's something that I wrote, and it's understanding grief and ways to heal awakens the spiritual self. And that was so true for me. It was just me realizing that in order for me to get to know and acknowledge who I am, I had to first acknowledge that I'm a spiritual being here having a human experience.
Mhm.
And by that, what does that look like for me? And to sum it up, I created that quote. But yes, definitely understanding grief and learning ways to heal was great. It was so good for me to acknowledge that and to get some self-actualization of about who I was and how to move forward.
Thank you so much for being here today. This was really special. It is the launch of the Inspired by JoAnn
I'm so
Take
excited.
That podcast, and I am so happy that you were my first guest. Thank you. I really appreciate you, and I know that what you shared today would definitely help the lives of others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for having me. Have a good day.